Caligula. You're a senator in Rome in the year 39 AD, and you've learned one rule for staying alive. Never let the emperor notice you for too long. This is Caligula. He believed he was a living god and had the heads knocked off statues of Jupiter so his own face could be put on instead. He planned a full-scale invasion of Britain, marched the entire army to the coast, lined up the ships, and then, with the whole empire watching, ordered the soldiers to walk into the surf and collect seashells, calling it the spoils of war. He loved his horse Incitatus so much, he gave it a marble stable, an ivory feeding trough, servants, and a seat at state dinners, and seriously discussed making it a consul of Rome. And when the Senate annoyed him, his solution wasn't subtle. He said he wished all of Rome had just one neck so he could cut off every head with a single blow. His own guards eventually agreed he was the problem and stabbed him 30 times in a palace corridor.
Napoleon Bonaparte. You're one of Napoleon's officers in 1807, and he's just told you he wants to celebrate a treaty with a rabbit hunt. This is Napoleon. The hunt's organizer had bred over 1,000 tame rabbits instead of catching wild ones, and the moment they were released, they didn't scatter. They ran straight at Napoleon and his men, climbing up their coats looking for food, swarming so fast that the future emperor of France had to retreat to his carriage while rabbits chased it down the road. At his own coronation, he refused to let the Pope crown him at all, snatched the crown out of his hands mid-ceremony, and put it on himself in front of everyone, just to make the point that his power came from no one. And during some of the most critical moments of his career, he was known to disappear for hours into scalding hot baths, sometimes falling asleep in them while generals waited outside for orders that never came.
Nero. You're a guest at one of Nero's parties, and you've just realized the only light in the garden is coming from somewhere you really don't want to look at. This is Nero. After blaming the Great Fire of Rome on Christians, he had them set on fire and used as human torches to light his own evening parties. He had a teenage boy named Sporus castrated, then married him in a full public wedding ceremony, complete with a veil and a dowry, and made the court address him as empress. He once forced the entire Senate to sit through hours of him singing and performing on the lyre, with the doors locked so no one could leave. And stories say women secretly gave birth in their seats because there was no way out. After the fire cleared half the city, he built himself a palace on the ashes with a 30-meter bronze statue of his own face and a dining room ceiling that rotated to mimic the sky. He died alone, abandoned by the same guards who once sang his praises.
Ivan the Terrible. You're a citizen of Novgorod in 1570, and you've just heard the Tsar believes your entire city is plotting against him. This is Ivan the Terrible. He sent his personal secret police, the Oprichnina, black-robed riders with dog skulls tied to their saddles to symbolize hunting down traitors. And over several weeks, an estimated 10,000 of his own people were tortured and killed, many thrown into the river under the ice. Legend says that when the architects finished building St. Basil's Cathedral, a building so beautiful it stunned even him, he had them blinded so they could never design anything to rival it again. And in a fit of rage during an argument, he struck his own son and heir with his iron-tipped staff and killed him, then spent the rest of his life reportedly haunted by what he'd done.
Elagabalus. You're a guest at the emperor's banquet, and the ceiling above the dining hall has just started to open. This is Elagabalus, who took the throne at 14 years old. He forced the Senate to worship a black stone he'd brought from Syria, placing it above every Roman god, including Jupiter himself. At that banquet, he had truckloads of violets and rose petals released from a false ceiling until guests were buried under the weight of flowers, with some reportedly unable to find their way out and suffocating. He married a Vestal virgin, breaking the single most sacred law in Rome, one usually punished by being buried alive. And historians wrote that he offered enormous sums of gold to any physician who could surgically give him a permanent female body while presenting as a woman and working nights in the palace as a prostitute. He didn't survive past 19, his body dragged through the streets and dumped in the Tiber.
Commodus. You're sitting in the Colosseum, and the emperor has just walked into the arena dressed as Hercules to fight for sport. This is Commodus.
He believed he was the literal reincarnation of Hercules and wore a lion's skin in public to prove it. He renamed the entire city of Rome after himself and renamed every single month of the year after his own 12 imperial titles. He fought hundreds of staged gladiator matches, always rigged so he'd win, and charged the imperial treasury a fortune for every appearance, slowly draining Rome dry. For entertainment, he had disabled citizens and amputees gathered in the arena, handed them sponges as fake weapons, and clubbed them to death himself, calling them giants he had personally slain. He was eventually strangled in his own bathtub by a wrestler hired by the people closest to him. Emperor Bokassa, you're a citizen of the Central African Republic in 1977, watching your country's entire yearly budget disappear into one afternoon. This is Emperor Bokassa. He crowned himself emperor in a ceremony deliberately copied from Napoleon, complete with an eagle-shaped throne dripping in diamonds and a solid gold crown, while a large share of the nation's wealth was spent on the spectacle and most of the population stayed in poverty. When school children protested having to buy expensive mandatory uniforms stamped with his face, he had many of them killed. He was widely accused of keeping political enemies in a personal freezer and, according to later trial testimony, of having served human flesh to foreign dignitaries who had no idea what they were eating.
Just in the second, you're a palace official in Constantinople, and the emperor has just tried to bite you again. This is just in the second. As his mental state collapsed, he reportedly attacked the servants and officials sent to attend him, biting and lashing out without warning. The palace eventually built him a special wheeled chair so guards could physically move him around and restrain him from wandering off or hurting someone. Convinced that music was the only thing keeping his fits under control, he had organ music played constantly throughout the palace, day and night. By the end, the empire was being quietly run by his wife and a general, while he was wheeled out only to be seen, not heard.
Caracalla. You're a citizen of Alexandria, and the emperor has just arrived in your city after hearing how the locals were making fun of him. This is Caracalla. He murdered his own brother and co-emperor, Geta, stabbing him to death in their mother's arms, then erased every trace of him, smashing statues, melting coins, and executing an estimated 20,000 people simply suspected of being his brother's friends. When he visited Alexandria and discovered the city had been mocking him in street performances, he ordered his troops to massacre its young male population, with reports describing thousands killed in a single sweep. He genuinely believed he was the reincarnated Alexander the Great, forced his soldiers into Macedonian-style uniforms, and had an elephant slaughtered in tribute to his past life.
Emperor Norton I. You're walking the streets of San Francisco in 1860, and a man in a peacock-feathered hat has just handed a shopkeeper a $50 bill he printed himself. This is Emperor Norton I. After losing his fortune in a failed business deal, he simply mailed a notice to the local newspapers in 1859 declaring himself Emperor of the United States, and the city decided to play along. He issued official decrees dissolving the United States Congress, ordered the construction of a bridge connecting Oakland and San Francisco decades before the Bay Bridge actually existed, and banned anyone from calling the city Frisco under threat of a fine. Local restaurants genuinely accepted his homemade currency, and when he died, an estimated 30,000 people, nearly a tenth of the city, turned out for his funeral.
Zhengde Emperor. You're a eunuch in the Forbidden City, and you've just been ordered to pretend to be a customer at a market that doesn't actually exist. This is the Zhengde Emperor. Bored of his royal duties, he built an entire fake marketplace inside the palace walls, complete with shops and stalls, then dressed as a commoner shopkeeper and made his own eunuchs and concubines act as customers haggling with him. He built a private pleasure compound called the Leopard Quarter, stocked with exotic animals, where he personally wrestled tigers and leopards, despite getting injured repeatedly. For years at a time, he refused to even look at official state paperwork, leaving the empire to run on autopilot while he hunted and partied. He died after falling drunk into a lake while fishing for fun, and never recovered.
Idi Amin, you're a government official in Uganda in 1972, and you've just been handed a 90-day deadline that's about to destroy the entire economy. This is Idi Amin. He gave himself a title so long it had to be printed across several lines, including self-proclaimed conqueror of the British Empire and uncrowned king of Scotland. He ordered the expulsion of the entire Asian population of Uganda within 90 days, seizing their homes and businesses overnight and collapsing the country's economy almost instantly.
Former aides have claimed he kept the preserved head of one of his murdered wives in a home freezer, and persistent accounts from people close to him described him boasting about eating the flesh of his enemies. By the end of his rule, an estimated 300,000 or more Ugandans were dead. If you liked this video, leave a thumbs up. But if you really liked it, hit the subscribe button for more, and feel free to comment new video ideas below.